I knew my marriage was in trouble when I found myself counting the days between conversations with my wife. 43 days since Lillian had asked me how my day went. 67 since she'd laughed at one of my jokes. But it was the morning I caught her removing her wedding ring before leaving for the gallery that I realized I wasn't just losing my wife, I was being systematically erased from her life. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Walter Harrison, and I've spent the last 22 years teaching art history at Riverside University. I'm the guy who can tell you why Monet painted water lilies obsessively in his final years, or explain the political undertones in Picasso's Blue Period. What I couldn't explain was why my wife of 18 years had suddenly become a stranger. Lillian owned the most prestigious art gallery in our college town. The Fisher Gallery had been her dream, and I'd supported it from day one, even when it meant taking out a second mortgage on our house. She was brilliant at what she did, had an eye for emerging artists that made collectors from 3 states drive to our little town just to see what she'd discovered next. But lately, something had changed. She'd started taking mysterious trips to scout new talent in cities I'd never heard her mention before. She'd developed an allergy to my touch, literally flinching when I'd try to hold her hand. And then there were the phone calls she'd take in the other room, her voice dropping to whispers I couldn't quite catch. It was my colleague and best friend, Hugh Kendall, who finally opened my eyes. Hugh taught in the English department, and we'd been grabbing beers every Thursday for the past decade. He was the kind of friend who'd tell you when you had spinach in your teeth or when your wife was cheating on you. "Walt," he said, setting down his beer with unusual gravity, "I need to tell you something and you're not going to like it." I felt my stomach drop. "What is it?" "I was in Chicago last weekend for that conference. I saw Lillian at Alinea, that fancy restaurant downtown." Hugh paused, clearly struggling with what came next. "She wasn't alone." "Business dinner?" I asked, though something in his expression told me I was grasping at straws. "She was with Liam Bell." Liam Bell. The name hit me like a physical blow. Liam was the town's golden boy architect, the guy whose buildings graced magazine covers and whose charm had made him wealthy beyond what our little college town usually produced. He was married to Nora, a woman who spent most of her time organizing charity galas and making sure everyone knew her husband was successful. Hugh struggled for words. Walt, her hand was on his thigh. They were holding hands across the table, and when they left together. I stared at my beer, watching the condensation slide down the glass like tears I couldn't shed. "How long do you think it's been going on?" "I don't know, buddy. But from what I saw, it wasn't their first dinner together." That night, I lay in bed next to Lillian, listening to her breathe, wondering how long she'd been living this double life. She came home at midnight, claiming she'd been doing inventory at the gallery. In 18 years of marriage, Lillian had never once done inventory that lasted past 6 p.m. The next morning, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I noticed how she'd changed her phone's passcode, how she'd started buying new lingerie I never saw her wear around me, how she'd suddenly developed an interest in architecture magazines, leaving them casually around the house like breadcrumbs leading to her betrayal. The breaking point came 2 weeks later when I overheard a phone conversation she was having with Claudia, her gallery partner. "He makes me feel alive again, Claudia," Lillian was saying, her voice carrying that breathless quality I remembered from our early dating days. "Walter he just makes coffee. He brings me coffee and talks about late painters. Liam makes me feel like I'm actually living." Late painters. 22 years of building a career studying the masters of art history, and to my wife, I was just the guy who talked about late painters. That's when I decided that if Lillian wanted to feel alive, I'd give her the most vivid experience of her life. I'd make her feel so alive that every nerve ending would be screaming. I spent the next week gathering evidence. It wasn't hard. Lillian had grown careless in her confidence. Credit card statements showed dinners for two at restaurants I'd never been to, hotel charges in cities where she claimed to be visiting artists, text messages she'd forgotten to delete, full of inside jokes and plans that didn't include me. The most damning piece came when I volunteered to help Liam prepare his submission for the State Architecture Awards. As the university's art history expert, I was often asked to consult on cultural projects. Liam had no idea I knew about the affair when he handed me his portfolio to review. Inside the folder, tucked between blueprints for his latest commercial building, was a handwritten note. L, every building I design now has you in mind. The curves of the walls, the way light enters the spaces, it's all you. Forever yours, Liam. I photographed the note, replaced it exactly where I'd found it, and finished reviewing his submission with a smile. Beautiful work, Liam, I told him. Really captures the essence of what you're trying to achieve. That night, I began planning my masterpiece. The thing about revenge is that it requires the same skills as teaching: careful preparation, perfect timing, and an understanding of your audience. I'd spent 2 decades learning how to hold a room's attention, how to build narrative tension, and how to deliver a revelation that would leave people talking for years. My first move was subtle. I arranged for divorce papers to be served to Lillian at her gallery's biggest event of the year, the annual charity auction that drew the cream of our town's society. But serving papers was just the opening act. The real show required much more careful orchestration. I started with the Art Society. Our town's cultural elite prided themselves on supporting the arts, but they were also the biggest gossips in 3 counties. I carefully prepared a package containing copies of Lillian's credit card statements, photos Hugh had managed to take of her and Liam in Chicago, and printed screenshots of text messages I'd recovered from her phone. The package went to Margaret Whitmore, the Art Society's president, and the woman who'd given Lillian her first big break in the gallery business. Margaret was also someone who valued loyalty above almost everything else, and who had the influence to make or break careers in our insular art world. But I didn't stop there. Liam's architecture firm was up for a major city contract to design the new municipal building. The selection committee included several university board members who knew me professionally. They also included Nora Bell's brother, David, who'd always been suspicious of Liam's late nights and mysterious business trips. I arranged a casual lunch with David, ostensibly to discuss a potential collaboration between the university and the city on historical preservation. Midway through our conversation, I casually mentioned seeing Lillian and Liam together in what seemed like more than a professional context. You know, I said, cutting into my sandwich with deliberate casualness, it's probably nothing. But I've noticed Lillian and your brother-in-law seem to be spending a lot of time together on various projects. I hope Nora's okay with all these business dinners. David's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Business dinners? Oh, I'm sure that's all they are. I backpedaled with practiced innocence. Lillian's been featuring some architectural photography lately, and Liam's been consulting. It's just that, well, as her husband, I sometimes feel a little left out of the loop. I watched the seed of doubt plant itself in David's mind. By the end of lunch, he was asking pointed questions about these consulting sessions, and I could practically see him planning a conversation with his sister. The next phase required Hugh's help. Together, we crafted an anonymous email to the local arts blog, a gossipy little website run by a recent journalism graduate who was hungry for any story that would get attention. The email contained just enough information to be intriguing without being legally actionable. Questions about conflicts of interest in the local arts scene, suggestions that gallery owners might be getting too cozy with the artists and professionals they featured. Are you sure about this? Hugh asked as we prepared to send the email. Once this starts, there's no taking it back. I thought about Lillian's words. Walter just makes coffee. I thought about 18 years of marriage reduced to a man who talked about late painters. I thought about the hotel charges and the secret dinners and the wedding ring she now removed like it burned her finger. "I'm sure," I said, and clicked send. The blog post went live on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, it was being shared in every group chat and social media circle in town. By Thursday, Margaret Whitmore had called an emergency art society meeting. By Friday, Nora Bell had hired a private investigator. But I wasn't done yet. The charity auction was still 2 weeks away, and I had a finale to prepare that would make everything else look like a dress rehearsal. I reached out to Tom Morrison, a journalist friend from my graduate school days, who now worked for the state's largest newspaper. Tom specialized in arts and culture coverage, and he'd been looking for a story about small-town cultural scenes. I suggested he might find our upcoming charity auction interesting, especially given some of the recent buzz about local arts politics. "There's been some interesting drama brewing," I told him over the phone. "Nothing confirmed, but the kind of small-town intrigue that makes for compelling human interest stories. Gallery owners, architects, society wives. It's like a soap opera with better art." Tom was intrigued enough to plan a trip down for the auction. I also made sure to mention the event to several other media contacts, framing it as a showcase of regional cultural collaboration. The final piece of my preparation involved Liam's Architecture Award submission. As one of the reviewers, I had legitimate access to all the materials. I carefully photographed every page, including that love note to Lillian, and prepared a comprehensive file documenting the timeline of his relationship with my wife alongside his professional projects. The night before the auction, I sat in my study, looking over everything I'd assembled: credit card records, photographs, text messages, witness statements, professional documentation, media contacts. It was like preparing for the most important lecture of my career. Except this time, the subject wasn't late painters. This time, the subject was very much alive and about to learn what it felt like to have your life's work crumble in public. Lillian came home late that night, as she had every night for months. She barely looked at me as she headed upstairs, muttering something about final preparations for the auction. "Should be quite a night," I called after her. "Mm-hmm," she replied, not turning around. "Hopefully everything goes smoothly." I smiled at her retreating figure. "Oh, I think it's going to be unforgettable." The charity auction was held at the Riverside Country Club, the kind of venue that screamed old money and social importance. Lillian had spent weeks preparing for this night, coordinating with caterers, arranging the artwork displays, and managing the guest list of the town's most influential residents. She looked beautiful that evening, I had to admit. She wore a black cocktail dress I'd never seen before, probably bought for one of her secret dinners with Liam, and had her hair styled in an elegant updo that showed off the diamond earrings I'd given her for our 10th anniversary. She was glowing with the kind of excitement I hadn't seen from her in years. "You look lovely," I told her as we arrived at the country club. She glanced at me with surprise, as if she'd forgotten I was coming. "Thank you. I hope tonight goes well." "I'm sure it will exceed everyone's expectations," I replied. The auction was scheduled to begin at 8, but cocktails started at 6:30. I watched Lillian work the room like the professional she was, charming potential bidders and thanking sponsors. Liam was there too, playing the role of supportive community member, though I noticed the way his eyes followed Lillian across the room. Margaret Whitmore approached me during cocktails, her expression carefully neutral. "Walter, I wonder if I could speak with you privately for a moment." We stepped onto the country club's terrace, where the October air carried the scent of fading leaves and social upheaval. "I received some disturbing information recently," Margaret said without preamble. "Information concerning Lillian and her professional relationships." I arranged my expression into one of concerned confusion. "What kind of information?" Margaret studied my face carefully. "The kind that makes me question whether the Art Society should continue its partnership with the Fisher Gallery." "Margaret, I'm not sure what you've heard, but I've heard enough, she interrupted. The question is whether you've heard the same things. Before I could respond, Hugh appeared on the terrace. Sorry to interrupt, but Walter, I think you need to see something. He handed me an envelope. Inside were divorce papers, officially served and ready for delivery. The process server was waiting in the parking lot, ready to make the delivery at my signal. Margaret's eyes widened as she realized what she was seeing. Walter, I had no idea you were planning to make an announcement tonight. Yes, I thought the timing was appropriate. At that moment, Nora Bell burst through the terrace doors, her face flushed with anger and champagne. Walter, I need to talk to you, now. Margaret discreetly excused herself, leaving me alone with Liam's wife. Nora was a small woman, but her fury made her seem larger, more dangerous. David told me about your little conversation, she hissed, about Liam and your wife. I hired an investigator, Walter. I know everything. What exactly do you know, Nora? I know about Chicago. I know about the hotel in St. Louis. I know about the apartment Liam's been renting downtown. The one he told me was for client meetings. Her voice was shaking with rage. I know my husband has been screwing your wife for the past 6 months. I felt a strange calm settle over me. What are you going to do about it? Nora's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. I'm going to destroy them both, tonight, in front of everyone. That's a coincidence, I said, signaling to Hugh. So am I. The auction began promptly at 8. Lillian stood at the podium, radiant and confident, thanking everyone for their support of the arts. The room was packed with the town's elite, university administrators, successful business owners, politicians, and cultural influencers. Tom Morrison, my journalist friend, was positioned near the back with his camera. Before we begin tonight's bidding, Lillian announced, I want to thank everyone who has made the Fisher Gallery's success possible. This community has embraced art and culture in ways that make me proud to call this place home. The applause was warm and genuine. Lillian was beloved in this room, respected for her eye and her dedication to bringing culture to our college town. That's when the process server walked in. Lillian Fisher? He called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. Lillian's smile faltered. Yes? You've been served. He handed her the divorce papers in front of 200 of the most important people in town. The silence was deafening as Lillian opened the envelope, her face going pale as she realized what she was holding. But that was just the opening act. Nora Bell stood up from her table near the front. Before we continue with the auction, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the room, I think everyone should know exactly what kind of woman they've been supporting. Nora, please. Liam started to stand, but his wife whirled on him. Sit down, you cheating bastard. The words rang out like a gunshot. Everyone here should know that Lillian Fisher has been having an affair with my husband for the past 6 months. Hotels, secret dinners, love letters, the whole sordid mess. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, the scraping of chairs as people turned to get a better view of the drama unfolding. Margaret Whitmore stood up, her face grim with vindication. Furthermore, Nora continued, pulling out a folder of papers, I have evidence that this affair has influenced business decisions, gallery features, architectural consultations, city contract recommendations, all tainted by their personal relationship. Lillian tried to regain control. This is neither the time nor the place. When is the right time? I stood up, my voice cutting through the chaos. When were you planning to tell me about Chicago, Lillian? About St. Louis? About the apartment downtown? The room went late silent. Every eye was on me now, the betrayed husband making his stand. 18 years of marriage, I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. 18 years of supporting your dreams, your gallery, your career. And you repay that by removing your wedding ring every morning like it's a burden you can't wait to shed. Lillian's face crumpled. Walter, I never meant for this to happen. You never meant to get caught, I corrected. There's a difference. Tom Morrison was photographing everything, his camera capturing each moment of the destruction. Other phones were out now, too, recording videos that would be all over social media within minutes. Liam finally found his voice. This is between us, Walter. It doesn't need to involve everyone else. I turned to face him, this man who'd been sleeping with my wife while shaking my hand at university functions. You made it involve everyone else the moment you decided to conduct your affair in public restaurants and hotel lobbies. Did you really think no one would notice? That's when I played my final card. I pulled out copies of the love note from Liam's architecture portfolio and handed them to Margaret Whitmore. I think the Art Society should know exactly how their featured architect chooses his collaborators, I said. Margaret read the note aloud, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. Every building I design now has you in mind. The curves of the walls, the way light enters the spaces, it's all you. The humiliation was complete. Lillian fled the podium in tears, pushing through the crowd toward the exit. Liam tried to follow her, but Nora blocked his path. Don't you dare, she snarled at her husband. Don't you dare chase after your whore while I'm standing right here. The auction was officially over, but the real show was just beginning. The fallout from the charity auction was swift and merciless. By morning, the story had spread beyond our small college town. Tom Morrison's article, titled Small Town Big Scandal, When Art and Architecture Collide, was picked up by regional papers and shared thousands of times on social media. The photos and videos from the auction went viral in our community. Lillian's face as she read the divorce papers, Nora's fury as she confronted her husband, my calm delivery of 18 years' worth of suppressed anger, it all became the kind of public spectacle that defines a place's gossip for decades. But I wasn't finished yet. The Art Society held an emergency meeting 3 days after the auction. Margaret Whitmore called me personally to inform me of their decision. The board has voted unanimously to suspend our partnership with the Fisher Gallery, she told me. We cannot support an institution whose owner has demonstrated such poor judgment and ethical lapses. I understand, I replied. I'm sure it was a difficult decision. Walter, I want you to know that the board also voted to offer you a position as our cultural advisor. Your handling of this situation has shown remarkable dignity under impossible circumstances. Dignity. If only she knew what I had planned next. Liam's professional destruction was even more satisfying to watch. The city council voted to suspend consideration of his firm for the municipal building project, pending investigation into potential conflicts of interest. The state architecture board opened an ethics inquiry based on the evidence Nora had provided. 3 of his current projects were put on hold while clients reassessed their relationships with his firm. But the piece de resistance came when Nora filed for divorce and demanded a forensic accounting of all of Liam's business dealings. She suspected, correctly, that he'd been using company funds to finance his affair. The apartment downtown, the expensive dinners, even some of the gifts he'd given Lillian, all paid for with money that legally belonged to their marital estate. Hugh and I were having our usual Thursday beer when he brought me the latest update. Nora's lawyer found evidence that Liam used the company credit card for that hotel in St. Louis, Hugh reported with barely concealed glee. Apparently, he charged it as a business expense for a client meeting that never happened. That seems like poor financial management, I observed, taking a sip of my beer. It gets better. The IRS is now interested in his tax returns for the past 3 years. Turns out claiming personal expenses as business deductions is frowned upon by federal authorities. I had to admit, watching Liam's empire crumble was deeply satisfying. But Lillian's destruction was more personal, and therefore required a more intimate touch. The gallery was hemorrhaging clients. 3 major collectors had pulled their pieces from upcoming shows. The university canceled its planned exhibition of faculty artwork. Even the coffee shop next door stopped displaying the Fisher Gallery's promotional materials. Claudia, Lillian's business partner, was desperately trying to distance herself from the scandal. She'd already started telling people that she'd always had concerns about Lillian's unprofessional behavior, but had been too loyal to speak up. That's when I decided to pay Claudia a visit. I found her at the gallery on a Thursday afternoon, frantically making phone calls trying to salvage their upcoming shows. She looked up when I entered, her expression wary. "Walter, I wasn't expecting you." "I imagine not. How's business?" Claudia's laugh was bitter. "How do you think? Half our artists want out of their contracts, our biggest sponsors have pulled funding, and I'm getting calls from reporters asking for comments about Lillian's ethical lapses." I wandered around the gallery, looking at the paintings and sculptures that Lillian had so carefully curated. Her eye for art really was exceptional. It was her eye for men that had proven problematic. "You know," I said casually, "I've been thinking about our conversation at the Morrison opening last year. You mentioned that you thought Lillian was getting too personally involved with some of the artists you represent." Claudia went very still. "I don't recall that conversation." "Really? Because I remember you being quite specific about your concerns. Something about blurred professional boundaries?" The truth was, Claudia had never said any such thing. But in her current panic, desperate to rewrite history and save her own reputation, she was vulnerable to suggestion. I may have expressed some general concerns about maintaining professional distance," she said carefully. "Of course, and I'm sure those same concerns extended to Lillian's relationship with Liam Bell. After all, featuring architectural photography right around the time she started her affair, that must have seemed like an obvious conflict of interest." I watched Claudia's face as she realized I was offering her a lifeline, a way to rebrand herself as the responsible partner who had tried to maintain ethical standards while Lillian ran wild. "Yes," she said slowly. "Yes, I was concerned about that collaboration from the beginning. I'm sure you documented those concerns, for legal protection." Yes, I should have documentation." By the time I left the gallery, Claudia was already drafting a statement distancing herself from Lillian's decisions and positioning herself as the wronged business partner. She'd throw Lillian completely under the bus to save her own career, and Lillian would have no one left to turn to. That evening, I was grading papers in my study when Lillian came home. She looked terrible, exhausted, defeated, aged by the stress of watching her life collapse in public. She stood in the doorway of my study for a long moment before speaking. "We need to talk," she said. I looked up from the essay I was reading. "Do we?" "Walter, please. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but we need to discuss what happens next. I think what happens next is fairly clear. You move out, we divide our assets according to the prenup you insisted on, and we both try to rebuild our lives." "It doesn't have to be like this. We could try counseling, work through this." "Lillian," I interrupted, setting down my pen, "you spent 6 months lying to me, cheating on me, and planning to leave me. The only thing you're sorry about is getting caught." She started crying then, the kind of desperate tears that come when someone realizes they've lost everything that mattered. But I felt nothing. The man who would have comforted her, who would have tried to save their marriage despite everything, had passed away the night I overheard her telling Claudia that I just made coffee. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. "Yes, you did. You stopped loving me long before you started sleeping with Liam. You just didn't have the courage to end our marriage honestly." She left without another word. I heard her packing upstairs, the sounds of 18 years being reduced to suitcases and boxes. By morning, she was gone. But my revenge wasn't complete yet. There was still one more act to perform. 3 weeks after Lillian moved out, I received an unexpected visitor. Liam Bell stood on my front porch, looking like a man who'd aged a decade in a month. His usual polished appearance had been replaced by wrinkled clothes and the kind of desperate energy that comes from watching your life fall apart in real time. "We need to talk," he said when I opened the door. "Do we?" I replied, echoing my conversation with Lillian. "You've destroyed everything, Walter. My marriage, my business, my reputation, all of it. Are you satisfied?" I studied his face, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the tremor in his hands. "Not quite." "What more do you want?" "I want you to understand something, Liam. You didn't just sleep with my wife. You made me a fool in my own community. You sat in faculty meetings with me, shook my hand at university functions, accepted my professional consultation on your projects, all while you were screwing my wife behind my back. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? Were you planning to tell me yourselves? Or were you just going to let me figure it out when Lillian asked for a divorce?" Liam ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen him make countless times during university meetings. "She was going to leave you. We were going to wait until after the municipal building contract was finalized. Then she was going to ask for a divorce." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. They'd planned out my humiliation like a business transaction, timing it around Liam's professional needs. "Well," I said, "I suppose I saved you both the trouble of pretending to care about my feelings." "The IRS is auditing me, Walter. My wife took half of everything in the divorce, and now the federal government wants to examine every business expense I've claimed for the past 5 years. I could go to prison." "That seems like a problem you should discuss with your accountant, not with me. I know you're behind this. The timing, the evidence that came out. This isn't just bad luck. You orchestrated all of it." I smiled at him, the same polite smile I'd given him hundreds of times before I knew he was betraying me. "I'm a history professor, Liam. I teach students about late painters and analyze cultural movements. What could I possibly know about destroying someone's life?" He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the moment he realized that the mild-mannered academic he'd dismissed as harmless had systematically dismantled everything he cared about. "You're not going to stop, are you?" he asked. "Stop what? I'm not doing anything except getting divorced and moving on with my life." But he was right, of course. I wasn't going to stop. Not yet. After Liam left, I made a phone call to David Bell, Nora's brother, and the man who sat on the city contract selection committee. "David, it's Walter Harrison. I wanted to follow up on our conversation about the municipal building project." "Walter, I'm glad you called. The committee has decided to reopen the bidding process. Given the circumstances with Liam's firm, we felt it was appropriate to consider other options." "That seems wise. I actually have a suggestion for you. There's a firm in the state capital, Morrison and Associates, that specializes in municipal buildings. They did the new courthouse in Millfield. Beautiful work, and they came in under budget. I'll look into them. Thanks for the recommendation." Morrison and Associates was run by Tom Morrison's brother, the same Tom Morrison who had covered the charity auction scandal. It was a legitimate recommendation. They really did excellent work. But it also meant that Liam's firm would be competing against a company with inside connections to the story that had destroyed his reputation. My next call was to Janet Pierce, the editor of our local newspaper. Janet had been following the scandal closely, and I knew she was working on a follow-up story about the broader implications for our town's cultural scene. "Janet, I wanted to thank you for your fair coverage of this difficult situation." "Of course, Walter. I can't imagine how hard this has been for you. I've been thinking about your question regarding the impact on local arts funding. I did some research, and I think you'll find the numbers interesting." I'd spent the previous week analyzing the financial relationships between the Fisher Gallery, Liam's architectural firm, and various city cultural initiatives. What I'd found was a web of mutual back-scratching that raised serious questions about how public arts funding had been allocated. The gallery received a $50,000 city grant last year for their community outreach program, I told Janet. That grant was approved by a committee that included two clients of Liam's firm. Around the same time, Liam's firm was selected for the library renovation project, a selection made by a committee that included Margaret Whitmore, who was then the gallery's biggest supporter. Are you suggesting there was some kind of quid pro quo arrangement? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just providing information about the relationships between various cultural institutions and city funding decisions. What you do with that information is up to you. Janet's follow-up article, published the following week, raised enough questions about local arts funding to prompt the City Council to order an audit of all cultural grants from the past 3 years. The audit would likely find no criminal wrongdoing, but it would keep the scandal in the news for months and ensure that both Lillian and Liam remained associated with questions about ethical lapses and potential corruption. But my masterpiece was still to come. I'd been invited to speak at the Regional Arts Council's annual conference, an invitation that had been extended before the scandal broke. The conference organizers had offered to let me withdraw from the program, understanding that I might not want to discuss arts administration while my personal life was in turmoil. Instead, I'd asked to modify my presentation topic. Instead of speaking about university community partnerships in arts education, I wanted to address ethics and accountability in small-town cultural institutions. The conference was held in the state capitol, with an audience of gallery owners, museum directors, arts administrators, and cultural journalists from across the region. Lillian and Liam's scandal had been covered in arts publications statewide, so everyone in the audience knew who I was and why my perspective on cultural ethics might be particularly relevant. I took the stage on the conference's final day, looking out at an audience of 200 arts professionals who had come to hear the betrayed husband's take on institutional accountability. 6 months ago, I began, I believed that our cultural institutions were fundamentally different from other businesses. I believed that people who dedicated their lives to art and beauty operated by higher ethical standards than those motivated purely by profit. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. I've learned that I was naive. Cultural institutions are run by human beings, and human beings are capable of the same selfishness, deception, and ethical lapses as anyone else. The difference is that when cultural leaders fail ethically, they don't just damage businesses, they damage the communities that trusted them to be stewards of something larger than themselves. I went on to discuss, in carefully general terms, the importance of transparency in cultural funding, the dangers of conflicts of interest in small communities, and the responsibility of arts leaders to maintain professional boundaries. I never mentioned Lillian or Liam by name. I didn't need to. Everyone in the audience knew exactly what I was talking about, and by the end of my presentation, I had effectively made their scandal a case study in cultural ethics that would be discussed in arts administration circles for years to come. The standing ovation I received wasn't just appreciation for my presentation, it was recognition of my dignity in the face of public humiliation, and acknowledgement that I had transformed my personal betrayal into a broader conversation about accountability in the arts. After my presentation, I was approached by Dr. Sarah Chen, the director of the State Arts Council. Walter, that was remarkable. I wonder if you'd be interested in consulting with us on developing new ethical guidelines for arts organizations that receive state funding. I'd be honored, I replied. And just like that, the scandal that was supposed to destroy my reputation had instead elevated me to a position of statewide influence in the very field where Lillian had tried to make her mark. 6 months later, I received word that the Fisher Gallery had closed permanently. Lillian had moved to another state, trying to rebuild her career somewhere her reputation hadn't preceded her. Liam's firm had declared bankruptcy, and he'd taken a job with a construction company in a city 3 hours away. I, meanwhile, had been promoted to department chair and offered a book contract to write about ethics in cultural institutions. My story had become a cautionary tale, but I was the hero of that tale. the dignified victim who had turned betrayal into a platform for positive change. The final piece of my revenge came in the form of a letter I received from Lillian, forwarded through my lawyer. It was brief. "Walter, I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. But I need you to know that I understand what you did, and why you did it. You didn't just want to punish me. You wanted to make sure I could never pretend that what we had didn't matter. Mission accomplished. I hope someday you can find peace." I read the letter twice, then filed it away with all the other documents from our marriage. She was right, of course. I hadn't just wanted to punish her for the affair. I'd wanted to make sure she understood the full cost of throwing away 18 years of marriage for 6 months of excitement. But more than that, I'd wanted to prove to myself that the mild-mannered professor who just made coffee was capable of more than she'd imagined. I'd wanted to show her, and everyone else, that underestimating Walter Harrison was a mistake they'd only make once. As I sat in my study that evening, grading papers and planning my next lecture, I reflected on what I'd learned about myself over the past year. I'd discovered that I was capable of patience, strategic thinking, and a level of calculated ruthlessness that surprised even me. I'd also learned that revenge, when properly executed, doesn't have to be violent or illegal to be absolutely devastating. Lillian had wanted to feel alive. I'd given her the most vivid experience of her life, the experience of watching everything she'd built crumble in public, while the man she'd dismissed as harmless orchestrated every moment of her downfall. Some might call what I did cruel. I prefer to think of it as educational. After all, I'm a teacher. And the lesson I taught Lillian and Liam about the consequences of betrayal was one they'll never forget.